Hi, and welcome to Respecting and Integrating Indigenous Culture in Birth Practices. I am Dr. Jill Diana Chasse, and I will be your instructor today. The outline for this class, first we're going to go over cultural integration, and then we're going to talk about specific regions, and these are also beliefs and traditions that are followed by some people in the United States who have these particular cultural affiliations. First will be Peru, then Native American, followed by Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, and Mayan. Culture. So the umbrella term of culture encompasses the social behavior, institutions, and norms, as well as the way that women conceptualize childbirth. It influences their fears, their needs, their expectations. It also can be extremely empowering when they get personal strength from ancestral energy. Childbearing is a biosocial event. It's not just something that happens to your body and adds to your family. It's also part of your community, of your social circle, of your family. And unfortunately, women often have to bear their children in cultural and economic situations that are different from their native beliefs. And that can make them feel uncomfortable. That can make them feel unsupported. Many women choose to deliver at home instead, where they're not able to access care if complications arise because of the lack of respect, dignity, and sometimes just the acknowledgement of one's cultural beliefs. Healthcare inequality is real, it's significant, and it's ongoing everywhere in the world. Back in 2007, the United Nations has had a Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Now, this declaration was considered the most comprehensive international instrument on the rights of Indigenous peoples, including a wide range of political, economic, social, cultural, spiritual, and environmental rights. Unfortunately, this declaration is not legally binding. So yes, it was adopted back in 2007, and it establishes a universal framework with the minimum standards for the survival, the dignity, and the well-being of Indigenous peoples, and that includes during the birth process. But again, not legally binding, does not impose any legal obligations on governments. It's human rights, and just like all human rights instruments, it carries moral force, which could make a significant difference. It affirms the inherent collective and the individual rights of Indigenous peoples around the world. So even though it's not binding, it is definitely something that can be shared to support those rights, that can be referred to, that can be used as a guideline. And while not endorsing the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the United States did agree to support the declaration. So that's wonderful. That's huge. These are two of the quotes I pulled out from the Declaration about Indigenous peoples. 24.1, Indigenous peoples have the right to their traditional medicines and maintain their health practices, including conservation of their vital medicinal plants, animals, and minerals. This can make a significant difference in birth because many women during labor use certain traditional herbs. A lot of them are proven safe and effective, but unfortunately, because they are not FDA approved or they are not accepted by their obstetrician or in some cases midwife, they are encouraged not to use them. To continue 24.1, Indigenous individuals also have the right to access without any discrimination all social and health services. 24.2, Indigenous individuals have an equal right to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. States shall take the necessary steps with a view to achieving progressively the full realization of this right. So again, it's not legally binding, but this Declaration of Rights is definitely something that can be used to promote and support the rights of Indigenous peoples wherever they are. Within many Indigenous cultures, birth itself is a ceremony. It's not just a medical event. Ceremony to introduce new life into this world and acknowledge the passing from the spiritual world into the physical world. Unfortunately, there are some issues. Sometimes Western medical interventions may not make this appropriate. Sometimes the interventions don't allow this to happen. And unfortunately, there are some women that are choosing not to seek care, even when needed, because they would rather have the ability to be in ceremony or ritual, or use pieces of the placenta or the umbilical cord. We'll talk about a little bit further on when discussing some of the cultures and how a ceremony goes around some of these parts of the birth. And in Western medicine, sometimes they're not allowed to follow through on a lot of these. It may not be deemed appropriate, may not be deemed safe. And so unfortunately, a lot of women are choosing not to be involved in medicine that can help save them. Some because of a lack of understanding, really the health literacy, the education, more outreach that needs to be done in these communities. But a lot of it is because of avoiding the disrespect or the ridicule. Many people feel that the devaluing of Indigenous medical practices is a form of ongoing colonization. So let's talk about Peru. Peru has discovered that embracing the Indigenous childbirth traditions actually saves lives. And we can learn a lot of lessons from Peru. Peru is in South America, and poverty in South America disproportionately affects the Indigenous communities. This is actually true in a lot of areas, that poverty does disproportionately affect the Indigenous communities in those areas. Maternal and neonatal mortality rates are high. This is especially in the Andes and the Amazon regions. We know that throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, approximately 1 million women give birth outside of health facilities each year, which leaves them vulnerable to complications. Now, we're not saying that it's necessary that they give birth in facilities. As a matter of fact, a lot of these women, especially in the Andes and Amazon regions, do not have access to a clinic or a birth center or some sort of facility. But sometimes they do have access to a closer, smaller clinic within their community or within walking distance, but they refuse to go because of fear, of disrespect, of fear of being ridiculed or insulted or completely ignored. And unfortunately, this does tend to happen. So it's not a fear without justification. They want to be somewhere having their babies the way that they traditionally had their babies. For example, Indigenous women in Peru choose their own birthing position. They like having the technique of, we'll talk about it a little bit further, but upright deliveries, holding on to a rope or holding on to a tassel, something hanging from the ceiling or traditionally hanging from a tree. Also, the way that they are treated is completely disrespectful, such as being told to take their clothes off. There are certain countries that women will birth without their clothing. There are other countries where they feel more comfortable with a long skirt or some ritual gear. And this is extremely important to respect, because telling them to lay on a stretcher, take their clothes off, throw on a crinkly white gown, and open their legs and put them into stirrups is not something that most women feel comfortable with. And especially when their culture is the complete antithesis of this, it makes it almost impossible for them to want to be in a situation, even if it's a life-saving situation. It's almost not worth it. So Peruvian health officials saw that women were not seeking care due to that disrespect of their culture, due to that ignorance and that essential rudeness of making their cultural practices and their traditional beliefs not mean anything. So these health officials realized that in order to encourage women to deliver in these safer facilities, they had to integrate the Indigenous practices with the modern medicine. They had to embrace these folk traditions and practices. And they found that once they started doing that, they made significant progress in reducing the maternal mortality rate. Between 1990 and 2015, Peru saw a 73% reduction in the maternal death ratio. And this was from providing these folk traditions, and providing these indigenous beliefs and practices, such as allowing women to squat or sit on a birth stool, allowing them to light sage to cleanse the area, allowing them to have ropes inside the hospital to hold on to, and to feel as though they were treated more humanely and they were not treated like numbers in a blind clinic that wouldn't accept their traditions. One of the other issues that health officials saw, and this is again happening in a lot of areas, is that having birth care providers that didn't speak their language was very difficult. Even if they had some understanding or knowledge of the language spoken by the hospital officials or the hospital caregivers, doctors, nurses, midwives, they wanted to be able to speak their native language. They wanted to be accompanied by family members during delivery. They wanted more people to be in there, not just the husband, sometimes the mother, sometimes more people in the family are important for these cultures, and they were not being allowed in the room. So seeing that this was something that was being requested, health officials decided to open up a lot of these clinics and allow them to have family members, allow them to use some traditional medicines, as long as they were safe, which again, these cultures have been using them for centuries. They find that certain herbs help manage nausea. Other herbs will help a birth that's failing to progress. They have other herbs that will help them after the birth, to deliver the placenta or to help to retone the uterus. Giving birth vertically, as I noted before with the rope, actually has happened in a lot of hospitals and clinics. You can see the picture on the left-hand side. This is actually a health official that is working with an individual, showing them how to use the rope here and explaining that this is something that's inside this birth clinic that they're allowed to do, rather than laying on a horizontal delivery bed, wearing hospital gowns and sitting with their legs in stirrups. This quote by Dr. Miriam Gutierrez Castro, "Thanks to culturally sensitive maternal health care, we are seeing a decline in neonatal and maternal morbidity and mortality in our communities and health centers. So it's coming directly from one of the doctors, and it's extremely impressive that allowing them to feel comfortable, respecting culture, and respecting birth traditions can make a difference. And again, this, even though this is specifically in Peru, if a woman follows these birth traditions and practices, a lot of them can be done anywhere, such as drinking tea made from piri-piri. Some women drink this type of reed-like tropical grass. It's called sedge grass. A specific kind of sedge grass is the piri-piri to prepare for labor. Other women drink mate. Mate is a tea infusion made from the leaves of the coca plant. They also often chew coca leaves to hasten labor and ease the pain. And actually, a lot of the birth centers now in Peru are allowing them to drink mate during birth, a small amount of mate. Giving birth standing up or squatting, this can be done anywhere, often with their arms up holding on to their husband or partner, or their arms up holding onto a rope. And then giving birth outside. This is something that a lot of women in Peru feel as though they have a connection to the earth and they don't want to be locked up inside. They don't feel as though they want to be enclosed in something. And some women that live in the United States feel the same way. And so there are certain areas that women can still birth outside. For example, having a home birth, that's something where they're able to, and some birth centers as well, have an area where giving birth outside is possible. And this respects their traditions and respects their Indigenous practices. So, talking about the Native American, American Indian population, we see that they have a long history of approaching pregnancy and childbirth as a spiritual event, which is not very different from how they approach most of their life. They tend to interweave religion and nature, medicine, and the earth. Harmony and balance with nature is part of the everyday living, part of their medical and health practices, as well as other practices, education and marriage and everything that happens. There's a harmony and a balance. There is nature, there is earth, there is spirit, and there is what happens to the body, the human body. And when that happens to be birth and childbirth, caring for that baby before they're born, and connecting to that baby's spirit and making sure the mother is well taken care of is extremely important, such as protective rituals, rituals where a mother and father would guarantee a safe delivery by washing their hands and their feet. Or sometimes they would employ medicine men and women to perform these rites to make deliveries easier. So certain rites, certain rituals, certain spiritual ceremonies would occur and still occur. There are some contemporary Native American cultures that still believe in these rites and rituals and ceremonies to help the birth become easier, help the pregnancy become easier, as well as the baby specifically, to help protect the baby from evil spirits. For example, they bury the placenta. Some Navajo tribe believe in burying the placenta as a way to protect the newborn from evil spirits. Other tribes, they feel as though washing the mother's hands before birth means that the baby would be clean. So traditionally, there were a lot of herbal remedies. Everything's from the earth, and from the earth, it goes to the mother and to the baby to help their spirit, to help the energy, and again, to help their physical ailments. For example, using walnut or wild cherry or raspberry leaf. Raspberry leaf is still used today. These indigenous cultures invented different techniques to start labor and to encourage women whose labor was stalling or failing to progress. They also used herbal teas for nausea and after the baby was born to help with delivering the afterbirth and help to retone the uterus. Cherokees used wild black cherry tea, and the Chasse tribes made a tea from the roots of the plant of cotton to reduce the pain of birthing women. A lot of these remedies are actually still used today, as I mentioned, the red raspberry leaf tea, and blue cohosh you're probably familiar with, which can help as a natural induction for labor, as well as promoting a rapid delivery or speeding up delivery of the placenta. Regarding the ceremonies that we had discussed, sometimes they would happen for days and days and days. There would be ceremonies that included the mother, and then there would be ceremonies where the mother was left alone, and especially around the time of the birth, where either she was by herself, she was with a female medicine woman or midwife, somebody that would help her birth her baby, or a woman-centered care team, maybe other people from her tribe, other women from her tribe, especially those who have had babies before, other elders. Typically, baby is birthed directly onto the leaves. The baby would be coming out while the mother was squatting. Sometimes the baby would go directly onto the earth. Other tribes have actually explained a way that they would soften the perineum through having hot rocks on the ground, and the mother would squat over the hot rocks. Blessing ways is a ceremony that would be held for several days, often to promote and invoke positive blessings and to avert misfortune. It's a little different from the blessing ways that we do in the Western world. A lot of tribes would continue to do blessing ways for many of life's blessings, such as a blessing of the home or of a girl's puberty rites. So during labor, a woman would hold onto a rope or sash belt that was traditionally thrown over tree limbs. This is very similar to the rope that was tied to a tree in Peruvian culture. Pulling on this sash belt, typically you would use a traditional sash belt made of intricate colored sheep wool. You can see in the picture on the right, that looks like a traditional sash. There's also different types of belts and ropes that can be wrapped around a pole or something in the home that many Native Americans use, as well as hospitals. There are hospitals now, especially multiple hospitals and birthing facilities on reservations have actually employed, just like Peru, they've employed some of these traditional beliefs and cultures. So as you see in the picture here, this woman who is holding a sash belt is in a hospital. There's other ceremonies that could be done while birthing that are definitely allowed in certain hospitals and certain birth centers, such as the utilization of herbs, drumming in the room, and drinking teas, for example. Now, depending on where the woman is birthing, this is still something that can be supported anywhere in the world. Many Native Americans still feel like they need advice from the medicine man or medicine woman. Again, this medicine man or woman continues to play an important role in their health. It is something, a traditional healer is something that could work in an integrative and collaborative relationship with a midwife or a doctor, nurse, OB, as long as they are willing to integrate and accept the the practice collaboratively in a way that respects the rights of the individual, in a way that they are able to look at the wise ways of nature like a traditional healer would, and the relationship between human and the environment and the spiritual world. This connection is sacred, and unfortunately a lot of women avoid Western medicine because of that disrespect of what they feel is sacred. So we know that this population has high rates of maternal morbidity and mortality. What several studies have shown us is the results that the contributing factors to these high rates of morbidity and mortality come from the women being uncomfortable and distrustful of the United States prenatal health care model and of Western medicine in general. They feel uncomfortable and disrespected because doctors do not allow them to continue with even healthy cultural practices, like drinking certain types of tea that has not shown any adverse effects, or burning sage. But again, they have found that their cultural practices and traditions are faced with disrespect, which cause them to lose their identities. There are certain ways that some women have been birthing within their families for years and centuries. And unfortunately, when these traditions are disrespected, they feel distrust and they feel like they want to detach themselves from modern medicine. As we've learned from other practices, such as in Peru, addressing this problem can be reframed by putting the cultural practices together in tandem with the medical techniques, current medical techniques and current technologies as necessary. So again, not saying that all current technologies are necessary for a physiologic birth. We can focus more on the mother's needs and wants, the cultural practices and the knowledge, and then have the evidence-based medicine working in tandem with those practices. So IHS, the Indian Health Service, is actually a part of the Department of Health and Human Services, and a part that came about to actually make those traditions and values respected, make sure that the cultural aspect of American Indian and Native Alaskan tribes are respected and that they're allowed. The past director of IHS said the values of human dignity, honesty, compassion, coupled with the shared values of many different tribes and cultures that have come to be spoken as Indian values of listening, mutual respect, dignity, and harmony must always be at the forefront of what we do and how we do it. We must be professional in all our actions. So IHS, yes, did come about to protect these values and respect these traditions. A lot of the IHS members, they're part of the Public Health Service under the Department of Health and Human Services, and I was lucky enough to work with several IHS officers when I worked for CDC, and one guy in particular was embedded in Oklahoma in a reservation for about 5-6 years, and learned a lot about the cultures and a lot about the traditions and the values. But he, along with many other individuals that are in Commission Corps with Indian Health Service, don't have this background and are not traditionally involved with any of these rites and ceremonies. So sometimes it does cause a little bit of conflict. Sometimes the tribes are uncomfortable having the quote-unquote white man on their land telling them what to do. So there has to be a bridge and a balance. It's good to know that the IHS is available to help, but it's also important to know that sometimes they want people within their own community to help them through certain issues, and childbirth is one of them. Some birth traditions and practices that still continue to this day and that are trying to be upheld by the communities, the tribes, and certain groups within the tribes, such as drinking herbal tea and burning cedar, sage, or sweetgrass. As I had mentioned before with like the smudge stick, the burning of these herbs is something that is more of a ritual, and they feel as though the cleansing of the area for both spiritual and emotional and psychological reasons is extremely important when a baby is being born. Drumming is a beautiful practice. I've actually seen several Native American ceremonies with drumming, and it's glorious, it's enchanting. And to be able to drum the baby into birth, into the air-breathing world is incredible. And that's something that can very easily be implemented into any birth practice anywhere. Navajo women traditionally try to keep a time of peace, and this actually goes for several tribes, having this peace around their pregnancy to avoid discussion of negative things, where they cannot talk about things that are bad, and people around them should not talk about things that are negative. Then the birthing itself, they believe in squatting, as noted earlier, or using that birthing sash that traditionally was hung over a tree. But even if there's something in a clinic or a birthing center, with the sash being above their bed to hold on to through laboring, that's a great way, to still respect their culture and meet them in the middle. And then finally, this is beautiful tradition of singing out the baby. So having a chant that they can sing once the water breaks. So, knowing that once the water breaks, it's happening. This is an impending birth. And singing out the baby chant can be done individually with a woman and her midwife or her partner support, depending on the tribe. It also can be done with other people. So on that note, I did include this Native American birth blessing, published in Sacred Words from S.D. Gill. It's called Earth's Prayer. From the heart of earth, by means of yellow pollen, blessing is extended. From the heart of sky, by means of blue pollen, blessing is extended. On top of pollen floor, may I there in blessing give birth. On top of a floor of fabrics, may I there in blessing give birth. As collected water flows, ahead of it the child, whereby blessing moves along ahead of it, may I there in blessing give birth. Thereby, without hesitating, thereby, with its mind straightened, hereby, with its travel means straightened, thereby, without its sting, may I there in blessing give birth. Now we move on to the Alaska Native population. So HHS says that the American Indian and Alaska Native population, the mothers specifically, are 4.5 times more likely to die from pregnancy and childbirth-related causes than white women are, and 2.5 times more likely to receive either no or late prenatal care. As we've been talking about, a lot of this is because of the fear of discrimination, the fear of disrespect and insulting of one's culture, traditions, and birth practices. So some independent organizations in Alaska, such as the Alaska Native Birth Workers community, have actually taken more of an inclusive approach to perinatal care and have reached out to try to reduce that number, reached out to women to educate them on different options that they have, and implementing care that focuses on not only the medical aspects of giving birth, but also the Indigenous cultures and the reclaiming of Indigenous bodies. And again, this is something that we've seen in some of the other communities. And what we have learned is that when this happens, and when an organization or a government, where Peru is concerned, takes action to say, we are going to allow you to use the traditions and the rites and the symbolism that feels important to you, we're also going to allow you to birth in a way that you feel comfortable. For example, squatting and not on your back, or allowing your husband or midwife or significant other to be there and to hold your hand through it, or to hold a rope for you. These are things that are important. And again, we've really seen this significant difference when they are integrated into other types of medical care. So reclaiming the ancestral rites, the knowledge, and the traditional birth practices have been extremely important to Native mothers and families. It's been expressed many times. And this is why, again, we mentioned Alaska Native Birth Workers community. This is one of the big organizations in the state that has been able to intertwine the culturally matched care and ceremony with the evidence-based medicine and trained practitioners in either birth centers. They're reaching out for home births, and of course in hospitals as well. Birth itself is considered a ceremony, co-founder and doula Jacob says. And the specific ways that each of us practice holding this ceremony space differs greatly. There is no one-size-fits-all model. There is no patient, normal, what we do for everybody reality. There is individual care. There is respect of their symbolism and of the traditions that the individuals want to focus on, such as pregnant women being encouraged to sing to the fetus. This is pretty amazing. The fact that the child in the womb is thought to be aware of its surroundings in Alaska Natives is very important, because pregnant women are encouraged to interact, tell stories, again, sing, but not talk about the baby becoming human. The up-ik, and forgive me if I pronounced that incorrectly, believed that the spirit was listening. So reverse psychology was indeed important. In Alaska Natives, the pregnancy and birth times are woman-centered events. Labor and birth are also times of quiet and calm. Great celebration, yes, but quiet and calm. And the elders regard birth as a community, social, and spiritual act. They celebrate within the communities. As with Native Americans, the Indian Health Service is also responsible for Native Alaska, for their tribal nations, and reducing maternal and infant mortality. Morbidity and mortality is actually included on their agenda. So this is important, and as mentioned before, it's also important to increase the capacity and reach of the Indigenous birth workers, serving that rural and frontier tribal populations. This is extremely vital, especially because there are some tribes that do not allow outsiders. So training these Indigenous birth workers is important for reaching those communities. And now we move on to Native Hawaiian. ku'u ewe, ku'u piko, ku'u iwi, ku'u koko. My umbilical cord, my navel, my bones, my blood. I thought this was a beautiful quote to begin this with. In Hawaii, the pregnant Native Hawaiian women have poor pregnancy outcomes. As we've seen in a lot of the Native, Indigenous, Aboriginal type communities, the fetal deaths are higher, the maternal mortality rates are higher, and again, a lot of these issues are fear of seeking care, as well as access to care. In the Native Hawaiian population, we've also seen that there's a high number of teenage pregnancies. Again, mistrust of Western medicine, and with good reason. In most organized medical practices, especially those with government oversight, traditions and practices are not followed or respected. One of the things that has made a significant difference in Hawaiians going to public clinics and hospitals is the law that allowed them to bring home their placenta, or e'ewe. The e'ewe is sacred to Native Hawaiians. They plant this placenta in the ground following a secret religious ritual. This binds the child to his or her homeland, which is a sacred connection. Hawaiians have a very sacred connection to their homeland, and each island is a different symbol, and they feel connected, and having that the placenta, the e'ewe, as part of the land helps to bind them. This burial site is just as important as a burial site for after death, this birth burial site for the placenta. Since for quite a long time, families were not allowed to take them out of the hospital. They were considered hazardous medical waste, and it was extremely disrespectful to many Hawaiian families who needed to bury that placenta, so they had that sacred connection to the homeland for that child. This quote is by Lili'ikala Kamaleahiwa, and it says, "The e'ewe of the newborn child is sacred and must be handled in a sacred manner in order to provide for the physical health of the child." This was said during a legislative committee, during the process of this becoming law. And now it does guarantee that women have the right to take their placenta home when they're birthing in a public facility. So this made a significant difference. Some other traditions are extremely important to bring into the public clinics and birthing centers, such as inclusion of the family, even the extended family. The significant other is encouraged to attend the prenatal visits and support the expecting mother. The woman's support of the woman is very important. Within the Hawaiian worldview, the culture, the feminine power is characterized as being steadfast and pro-generative in its energy. Some facilities even allow the use of herbs for medication under close supervision. The Native Hawaiian culture uses the earth a lot for health purposes, especially in birth. So touching the earth, grounding, using the ocean, and using herbs, different foods from the land as well. Some tinctures, for example, are made from various plants and blossoms. Some are for infertility, quick delivery, ease of pain in childbirth, even to lubricate the birth canal. A nut oil is used to prevent stretch marks, and specific plant leaves are used to help milk production. The hau flower, it's a traditional hibiscus, an ocean hibiscus. It's said to have been named after the goddess Haumea, which we'll talk about shortly. The hau flower is eaten as part of a traditional and cultural birth practice. by women right before they're about to give birth. It is believed to help alleviate the pain of childbirth and allows a woman to dilate to give birth more easily. In addition, the use of the inner bark with the sap was soaked, and this is again of the how flower, was soaked and put in a drink and rubbed on the stomach to hasten labor. So in Hawaii, the birth keepers include the kahuna pelekehi, which is the midwife, and this is literally meaning protector of the child, and la'u lapa'au, the herbalists. Women are looked to as the primary caretakers for women that are pregnant, the wahin, and they educate them in nutrition and exercise, prenatal and postnatal care, and assist them in finding the right treatments, typically from the earth. It's a beautiful quote from Sharon Kailiolani Odom. Focuses on how in the Western world there's a lot of fear surrounding pregnancy and birth. And Native Hawaiian, they focus more on taking away the fear and filling it with empowerment, making it strong. Some customs that are believed and followed even today are that women eat a reduced diet in the 3rd trimester due to fear of a large fetus and a difficult birth. They feel that bathing in the ocean prior to delivery helps to loosen the baby because of the soothing currents of the ocean, and that bathing in the ocean prior to labor would ensure that the pain during labor would be more tolerable. In addition to some of the other cultures that we've discussed, squatting or kneeling over kapa, which is a cloth made from the wauki tree, or lauhala mats made from the leaves of the hala tree, with someone supporting her from behind, can be a favored laboring position. It's a position that, again, is used traditionally and currently, depending on where she's birthing, is done outside. Again, because outside there is a connection with the earth, with the land, with the spirit, mana. Hawaiian culture, mana is the spiritual energy of power and strength. It's reflected, felt, and experienced in that connection between the psyche and the life forms surrounding it. Everybody, the gods, nature, family, the ocean, the earth. It creates a sense of relationship with energy and the land, bringing it into harmony, or lokahai, human life coming from not only two biological parents, but from a complex spiritual and physical connection that ties humans with a bond of kinship to everything else in the world. All the connection to the island, connection to the spiritual energy, connections to the earth. Each island, as I had mentioned before when we were talking about the burying of the placenta and how the connection to the earth is sacred. Well, each island is its own teacher. Each island has its own unique story and message. Now, Haumea, mentioned earlier with the flower how. Haumea is the goddess of creation and fertility and birth. And respecting and honoring her helps ease labor pain and birth. It also helps one to live pono. Pono is true living, living rightfully, fair and just. Pono's goodness, well-being, welfare, it's a shared ideas, earth, life, and spirit. So this is an example of a form of a map recognizing the gods and spirits, nature and family, as well as mana, which is the energy, and the lokai, which is harmony. So the traditional Native Hawaiian conception of psyche includes person in the middle, and again connected with, as we see in this drawing here, family, with nature and the spiritual world, with mana, the life energy, and of course harmony, lokai. Now moving on to Mayan culture. So traditional Mayan culture covers the Mayan regions, which are southeast Mexico, all of Guatemala, and Belize. In many areas in this region, accessing basic healthcare services is very difficult because access is limited. Many pregnancies tend to be high risk, according to the region's health officials. Indigenous women have been passing on birthing traditions for many centuries. And midwives, known as parteras or comadronas, practice folk healing traditions, or curanderismo. So in the broader Mayan region, Indigenous and rural women are more vulnerable to high-risk pregnancies. This makes it harder for them to travel long distances. And so the comadronas, being a bridge between the traditional cultural beliefs as well as understanding modern medicine and evidence-based care, they will go to the women no matter where they are, even if they're far away from a hospital. They will give them health support, and they will provide care and respectful treatment, even if they fear hospitals and they fear modern medicine. Because the comadronas are from the inside, they are part of the culture, and many women trust them and understand them. Unfortunately, being accepted by the government and the public health system has been a battle. Midwives in the Mayan region have been fighting to be recognized, and unfortunately, unlike Peru, they are not necessarily part of the official public health system. So according to National Geographic, due to a lack of services and respect, the rate among rural Indigenous women is high. So this is referring to the maternal mortality rate. Both independent organizations, as well as Guatemala and Mexico's governments, have actually launched programs to help train midwives and provide some resources. So even though they're not necessarily including the comadronas in the public health system, they are doing trainings. They are reaching out in certain parts of Guatemala and Mexico to train midwives and to provide resources to the midwives, the comadronas, that will go to these further away areas and help them to reduce that maternal mortality. Again, they don't trust, a lot of the women don't trust modern medicine. They don't trust the doctors and the white coats in the cold clinics. They trust their traditional specialists. In Mexico, they use healers such as Yerbera, an herbalist, Sobadora, a folk chiropractor, curandera, a spiritual healer, and parteras. They're the midwives, and this group of healers, these traditional healers, are trusted, and they are the main healthcare providers, especially when women and their families have fear of going to the public hospitals. Imelda Lopez Sanchez is a midwife with the Guatemala Association of Comadronas in the MAM area, ACAM, and she has said that it's about preserving the culture and keeping this tradition alive. Again, so it's a mix of evidence-based care and supportive, healthy medical care intertwined with traditional beliefs and cultural respect. There are some contemporary health providers that can interweave them as well. So a rebozo, for example, is used across the United States, not just in areas with people that have Mayan background and traditions in their family. The rebozo is a traditional Mexican shawl that has been passed down through generations. It can be used in many ways. Aside from just being a shawl, it's also used in labor, birth, and using for similar to the rope that we saw and the Navajo belt. It can be used for that, as well as, and if we look in the top left, we can see the picture with sifting. Now, sifting is a technique which helps to relax pelvic muscles and to help the birth progress. You're probably familiar with that, but traditionally in Mexico, it's actually used for other things as well. In addition, I didn't include it here, but Mayan massage, Sobata Maya, and other massages to focus on either the uterus and the reproductive organs to help with fertility, as well as to help with, once a woman is pregnant, to support those parts and to support and encourage healthy development of the fetus. Some other traditional customs that can be intertwined into current medical practices include homemade altars. So these are traditionally set up on a stone floor, brick fireplace mantle. Sometimes if it's outside, they're set up on bricks with sage and smudging with sage for smudging and small clay pots. I'm sorry. So the sage is rolled into little sticks and lit, and that's used for smudging and dispelling negative energy. And there's little small clay pots that they use to collect the ashes after the burning of the dried bundle of herbs. Certain clinics and birth centers will allow this. Unfortunately, it's still an issue getting general acceptance from Mexico and from some of the regions, especially some public hospitals, allowing them to burn, which obviously for safety reasons, especially with oxygen around in the hospital. But there are also more practices that can be allowed, such as having particular herbs to eat or drink. They also are allowing different types of practices for the actual birthing, so different positions and using different devices and what have you. And so Luna Maya, for example, is a birth center in Mexico. They have 2 birth centers there, and they have been serving Indigenous women. And these 2 centers combined have an average of 80 births per year with a 0 rate of maternal deaths. 0. So they haven't had any. Again, this will change over time, but looking at that maternal mortality rate, knowing that these women do have respectful care at the same time, they do have care that is from educated providers that have resources and that can help the woman and the baby as needed. To summarize, we've learned that it makes a difference to provide culturally respective care. As long as you are providing culturally respective care that adequately includes Indigenous peoples' traditions and practices, you can make a significant impact on reducing maternal morbidity and mortality. And this is absolutely especially true, as we've seen in those areas where the women are terrified to go to seek care because they're afraid that they're going to be harassed, or it threatens their autonomy and disrespects their religion, disrespects their beliefs and their traditions. So bridging that modern medicine with traditional cultures is huge, and It can allow an open door for women to feel as though they're supported, and it's okay for them to reach out for help. It's okay to trust, but before they learn that, they have to see that respect. And in any culture, in anywhere in the world, just understanding that and knowing that you may not have an in-depth knowledge of their particular traditions, but be open, allow them to teach you, allow them to show you what they do and why they do it, and teach you these are the types of teas we drink, and this is the way that I would prefer to birth. And not pushing sanctions and rules and regulations on them. That can allow these women to feel more comfortable and to open up and to have that support that they need, which again can help reduce maternal and infant morbidity and mortality. The following 2 pages are the references for this presentation. Thank you so much for joining us in this training today, and I leave you with this note. Ua ola, loko iki aloha. Love gives life within. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.